What if I told you that the most heartbreaking stories in baseball aren't about losing? They're about being almost perfect, about dominating the regular season, crushing the stats, silencing the doubters only to fall apart when the world was watching. This isn't just about a missed catch or a bad pitch. It's about legacies undone in real time. It's about a ball slipping under a glove, a manager's fateful decision, a stolen base that rewrote history. These are the teams that had everything except the ending. From the 116-win Mariners to the 107-win Astros, from the cursed Cubs to the shattered Red Sox, this is the story of baseball's most devastating collapses. And once you hear them all, you'll never watch October the same way again. 1. When the game turns on you, baseball's most painful collapse begins in the Bronx. There's a special kind of silence that follows a historic collapse, a sound louder than cheering, more deafening than boos. It's the sound of disbelief, and nowhere was that silence more thunderous than in Yankee Stadium. October 2004. Picture it, the New York Yankees, baseball royalty, standing on the brink of yet another World Series berth, up 3-0 in the American League Championship Series against their most bitter, most cursed rival, the Boston Red Sox. No team in MLB history had ever come back from a 3-0 deficit. This was over, or so everyone thought. The Yankees had just obliterated Boston 19-8 in Game 3. They had Mariano Rivera, the greatest closer the game has ever seen, waiting on the mound with a 4-3 lead in the ninth inning of Game 4. The sweep was 1 out away, but baseball, in its cruel genius, doesn't care for scripts. Kevin Miller walked. That's all it took. Dave Roberts came in to pinch run and stole second base, the kind of steal that changes history. Del Mueller singled, tied game, and David Ortiz, a name that would become legend in that very week, crushed a walk-off 2-run homer in the 12th. The Red Sox lived. Game 5. Another war of attrition. The Yankees led again, blew it again. Another Ortiz walk-off, this time in the 14th inning. Suddenly, history wasn't favoring the team in pinstripes. It was leaning toward the team that hadn't won a title since the First World War. Then came Game 6, the bloody sock game. Curt Schilling, pitching with a torn tendon sheath, defied pain and logic to silence the Yankees. Game 7, a massacre. Boston stormed into the Bronx and won 10-3. The Yankees managed just 5 hits. That roar of Yankee dominance, built over decades, was gone, and in its place was a silence await. They had become the first team in MLB history to lose a best-of-7 series after leading 3-0. The Red Sox didn't just beat the Yankees, they exorcised them, and then went on to sweep the World Series and break the 86-year curse of the Bambino. For Yankees fans, 2004 isn't remembered as the season that almost made it. It's remembered as the season the unthinkable happened. A dynasty undone not by a better team, but by a team that refused to believe it was dead. 2. 1 out away. The night Bill Buckner became a symbol, but never the whole story. Every baseball fan knows the image. A ground ball rolls softly down the first base line. The crowd gasps. It slips under a glove, through the legs, into history. That glove belonged to Bill Buckner. But to leave the story, there would be to ignore the heartbreak, the pressure, and the very anatomy of a choke that haunted Boston for nearly 2 more decades. The year was 1986. The Boston Red Sox, led by a young fireballer named Roger Clemens, who won both the AL Cy Young and MVP that year, were back in the World Series for the first time since 1975. They were up 3-2 in the series against the New York Mets. Game 6, top of the 10th inning. Red Sox up 5-3, 2 outs. Nobody on. The champagne was on ice. The locker room was being plastic wrapped. They were 3 strikes away from ending the 68-year curse. Calvin Schiraldi gets the first 2 outs. Then Gary Carter singles. Kevin Mitchell singles. Reynolds singles. 1 run in. Now it's 5-4. Bob Stanley is called in to stop the bleeding. His 6th pitch, a wild one. Tie game. Then came Mookie Wilson's infamous dribbler. The ball trickled toward Buckner. a player whose ankles were so wrecked that he should have been lifted for defense, as usual. But the manager left him in, perhaps for sentiment, perhaps for a fairy tale ending. Instead, it became tragedy. The ball scooted through his legs. Knight scored. The Mets won, and Buckner, he became a scapegoat, receiving death threats, boos, and decades of vilification. Despite the fact that the game was already tied before the error, Game 7 wasn't any better. The Red Sox jumped ahead 3-0 early, but the Mets tied it and then pulled away. Final score 8-5. The curse was alive, and the Buckner play was seared into the public consciousness not just as a mistake, but as a metaphor. Yet the real collapse was systemic. The bullpen couldn't hold a 3-run, 2-out lead. The managerial decision to leave Buckner in was emotional, not tactical. The team as a whole unraveled, and the ghost of that night wouldn't be exorcised until 2004. Buckner's name may have carried the weight, but the loss was collective and painfully, utterly avoidable. 3 black cats and burnouts, the Cubs' first collapse that set the tone for a century. There are chokes and then there are curses. And while most Cubs fans speak in hushed tones about 2003, true heartbreak historians know it all really started in 1969. This wasn't a shortfall. It was a free fall, a spiraling crash from hopeful dominance into epic disaster. The 1969 Chicago Cubs weren't just good, they were beloved. They were powered by legends Ernie Banks, Billy Williams, Ron Santo, and Ferguson Jenkins, future Hall of Famers, all at once. They were the team every sports writer wanted to see in October. By August 19th, the Cubs held an 8.5-game lead over the division, and their fans were already eyeing the World Series. Wrigley Field buzzed with optimism. There were even whispers this might finally be the year, but baseball, again, had different plans. Down the stretch, the Cubs fell apart. From 77 to 45, they limped to a 92-70 finish, losing 25 of their final 40 games. Meanwhile, the upstart Mets, yes, those same miracle Mets went nuclear. They finished on a 38-11 run, overtook the Cubs, won the division, and then won the whole damn thing. But the most infamous moment, September 9th, at Shea Stadium. Ron Santo stood in the on-deck circle when a stray black cat wandered onto the field, walked right in front of the Cubs' dugout, stared them down like it knew something. Superstition or not, from that moment forward, it felt like the baseball gods had turned their backs. The offense dried up. Banks and Santo slumped. Williams couldn't carry the load, and the manager, Leo Juriker, stuck to his old-school approach: play your stars every day, no rest, no rotation. By the end, his stars weren't stars anymore. They were spent. The collapse was so dramatic, so final, that it set a tone for the next few decades of Cubs baseball. Near misses, heartbreaks, and always that lingering fear that even when the team was good, something would go wrong. The 1969 season didn't just end a playoff race. It planted the seeds of a long and painful narrative, a cautionary tale in blue and white pinstripes. 7 games, 17 days, and one sudden death spiral, the 2007 Mets meltdown. In baseball, collapses aren't always made of one bad pitch or one tragic error. Sometimes they creep in slowly, game by game, inning by inning, until the realization hits too late. That's what makes the 2007 New York Mets collapse so brutal. It was a slow-motion disaster that unfolded in full view, with the entire city watching. For most of the season, the Mets were kings of the NL East. From mid-May to late September, they held first place, 7 games up with just 17 left. That's not a cushion, it's a fortress. But no lead is safe when the wheels start coming off all at once. This wasn't some fluky underperformance. It was a total system failure. The team was loaded: David Wright, Jose Reyes, Carlos Beltran, all in their primes. Pedro Martinez and Tom Glavine headlined the rotation. On paper, the Mets weren't just postseason bound, they looked built for a deep run. But reality laughed in their face. Beginning September 14th, the Mets lost 12 of their final 17 games. While they stumbled, the Phillies surged, winning 13 of 17. That 7-game lead vanished like vapor. The pitching staff melted down. Glavine, a future Hall of Famer, was a disaster in the most critical stretch. His era in September, 6.10. The bullpen leaking runs like a sieve. Leads evaporated late. Confidence disappeared earlier. And the final blow, the last game of the season, all they had to do was win. One game. Instead, Glavine gave up 7 runs in the first inning to the Florida Marlins. The Mets were done before their fans even found their seats. Meanwhile, the Phillies sealed their comeback by beating the Nationals. Division lost, playoffs missed, confidence destroyed. The 2007 collapse wasn't flashy. It didn't feature one moment like Buckner or Bartman, but it was relentless, like a rope slowly unraveling until the whole season fell through. And what hurt the most? Everyone saw it coming, and no one could stop it. 5. The 3-1 that broke Cleveland's heart again. 2016, and the rain delay that changed everything. Sometimes the game doesn't just break your heart, it dares you to believe, lifts you to the edge of ecstasy, and then pulls the rug at the final second. That was the 2016 Cleveland Indians. And if you think the name alone foreshadows the ending, you're right, but not for the reason you'd expect. By game 4 of the World Series, the Indians led the Chicago Cubs 3-1. They'd outscored them 15-7 and looked poised to end a championship drought dating back to 1948. The offense was clicking. The bullpen anchored by Andrew Miller was untouchable. Corey Kluber was dealing like a man with ice in his veins. They were 60-21 at home during the regular season. This wasn't luck. This was dominance. But then came the shift. Game 5. Cubs survive. Barely. John Lester holds on. Game 6. Disaster. A grand slam by Addison Russell torpedoes Cleveland early. Final score, 9-3. Suddenly, the 3-1 lead is gone, and it's Game 7 in Cleveland. One game, one chance, a storybook, ending for someone. The game seesaws through 9 tension-choked innings. In the bottom of the 8th, down 6-3, Rajai Davis becomes a folk hero, smashing a game-tying 2-run homer. Off Aroldis Chapman, the hardest-throwing man in baseball. Progressive Field erupts. It feels like destiny. Then rain, a 17-minute delay, and with that pause, all the momentum, the crowd's energy, the sense that fate was about to break Cleveland's way just dissipates. In the 10th inning, Ben Zobrist drives in a run. Miguel Montero adds another. The Cubs lead 8-6. Cleveland scores one more, but it's not enough. Final score, 8-7. The Cubs, with their own 108-year drought, celebrate the most emotional win in modern baseball history, and the Indians, they become the 5th team ever to blow a 3-1 World Series lead. No other active franchise has a longer championship drought. This wasn't a collapse of skill, it was one of inches, timing, and cruel poetic symmetry, because in a battle of cursed legacies, someone had to lose. And for Cleveland, it was yet another chapter in a saga of heartbreak. 6. The house that couldn't hold. Houston's collapse in the 2019 World Series. When a team wins 107 games in a single regular season, dominates both leagues statistically, and sends the Cy Young finalists to the mound, there's an unspoken assumption this is the team. This is the year. That was the 2019 Houston Astros. They had talent. They had momentum. They had home field advantage. And then they lost every single game they played in their own stadium. That's not just rare, it's unprecedented. Never before in MLB history had the road team won every game of a World Series. But the 2019 Astros weren't just fighting the Nationals, they were fighting fate, fatigue, and one of the strangest playoff dynamics ever recorded. Entering Game 7, the Astros had a 2-0 lead in the 7th inning. Zach Greinke had been nearly perfect, just one hit allowed, mixing speed and location like a veteran artist. But after surrendering a solo home run to Anthony Rendon and walking Juan Soto, manager A.J. Hinch made the decision that will forever define the series. He pulled Greinke at 80 pitches and brought in Will Harris, a trusted reliever who had been lights out all postseason. First pitch, Howie Kendrick sends it screaming into the foul pole in right field. A 2-run bomb. The Nationals take the lead, and the Astros never recover. Their once mighty offense went quiet. In Game 7 alone, they went 1-for-8 with runners in scoring position and Verlander. Cole, these aces weren't bad, but they weren't dominant. Verlander's World Series era ballooned to 5.73 over to Starks. Jarrett Cole, who had bulldozed through the AL with a 2.50 era and a league-leading strikeout total, was warming in the bullpen but never used. The Nationals scored 6 unanswered runs to take the championship 6-2. This wasn't a slow collapse. It was surgical. 1 decision, 1 homer, 1 silence that fell over Minute Maid Park and never lifted. It wasn't just the end of a season, it was the unraveling of a would-be dynasty. And in a post-sign-stealing scandal world, many saw it as poetic justice. But to those who only watched the field, it was the collapse of a titan, a team so good, so complete, that their loss almost didn't feel real. 7. The Bartman ball and the 5 outs that broke Wrigley for many years. If you asked a Cubs fan what pain felt like, they didn't have to say a word. They'd just show you a clip from Game 6 of the 2003 NLCS. 5 outs. That's how close the Chicago Cubs were to making the World Series for the first time since 1945. They had a 3-0 lead over the Florida Marlins in the 8th inning. Mark Pryor was dealing. The crowd was electric, and Wrigley Field was beginning to dream again, and then, in one foul swing, everything changed. Luis Castillo lofted a pitch toward the left field stands. Moises Alou tracked it, jumped, reached, but as his glove stretched upward, a hand did too from the stands. That hand belonged to Steve Bartman, a lifelong Cubs fan who made the mistake of reaching for a ball that just might have been caught. Alou slammed his glove in frustration. The fans booed. But what followed had nothing to do with Bartman and everything to do with the team. That unraveled in real time. Castillo walked. Then Ivan Rodriguez singled. Then an error by shortstop Alex Gonzalez on a routine double play ball loaded the bases. Then Derek Lee doubled. Tie game. By the end of the inning, the Marlins had scored 8 unanswered runs. Game 6 ended 8-3. Game 7 was a formality. The Cubs had lost more than a game, they lost the moment. The pressure, the legacy, the weight of decades came crashing down, and it showed. They lost 9-6. The Marlins went on to win the World Series. Bartman, meanwhile, became the scapegoat for a collapse that wasn't his. He received death threats, had to go into hiding, and didn't return to Wrigley for more than a decade. The reality, the Cubs choked. They were 5 outs away. Their ace was on the mound. The crowd was behind them. But their defense, their bullpen, and their mental composure fell apart. Blame the curse, blame the air, blame the moment. But the truth is, Bartman was just a symbol. The collapse was deeper, more human, and far more haunting. 8. When the best just wasn't enough, Dodgers, 106 wins, and a grand slam goodbye. The 2019 Los Angeles Dodgers weren't just good, they were dominant. They steamrolled the regular season with 106 wins, the most in franchise history. They had a roster filled with MVPs, All-Stars, and flame-throwing arms. And they weren't limping into the playoffs, they were roaring. So when they faced the Washington Nationals, a wild card team, in the NLDS, no one expected trouble. They weren't just favorites, they were expected to cruise, and for most of Game 5 at Dodger Stadium, it looked like they would. Walker Buehler was on fire. Through 5 innings, the Dodgers led 3-0. The crowd was alive. Everything was going according to plan. Then came the unraveling. In the 6th inning, Anthony Rendon doubled. Juan Soto singled. Nationals on the board, but still 3-1. No reason to panic. Manager Dave Roberts went to his ace in the hole, Clayton Kershaw, a future Hall of Famer, a franchise icon, and a man haunted by October. In just 6 pitches, Kershaw gave up back-to-back home runs, first to Rendon, then to Soto. Tie game. The stadium, once a wall of noise, fell dead silent. Roberts pulled Kershaw, but the damage was done. The game stretched into extra innings, and then, in the 10th, the hammer fell. Bases loaded. Joe Kelly on the mound. Howie Kendrick at the plate. One swing. Grand slam. Nationals 7. Dodgers 3. The Dodgers went down in order in the bottom of the 10th. Their record-setting season ended not with a fight, but with a stunned hush. A team built for a World Series run eliminated in 5 games at home. It was the first time a team with 105 wins failed to reach the League Championship Series in the Division Series era, but the real story wasn't just the loss. It was the timing of every move, the ghost of every past postseason, and the haunting echo of a franchise that can never seem to align its regular season dominance with October success. For Kershaw, it was another scar. For Roberts, another round of questions. And for Dodgers fans, another postseason where next year became a painful echo. And the call that shattered a dynasty dream. Cardinals and the ghost of Game 6, 1985. In baseball, you don't often remember umpires unless they change the course of history. In Game 6 of the 1985 World Series, Don Denkinger did just that. The St. Louis Cardinals were one win away from their second title of the decade. They had 101 regular season wins. They had momentum. They had a 3-2 series lead over the Kansas City Royals. And in Game 6, they led 1-0 heading into the bottom of the 9th. Then came the call. Jorge Orta hit a slow grounder to first. Jack Clark fielded it cleanly and flipped it to pitcher Todd Worrell, who was covering the bag. Orta was clearly out. TV replays confirmed it, but Denkinger called him safe. The air left the Cardinals' lungs. They unraveled in real time. A pass ball, a walk, a bloop single, a 2-run hit. Game over. Royals win to 2-1. The Cardinals were stunned, furious, shaken, and in Game 7, they didn't just lose, they were obliterated. Final score, 11-0. Their composure had evaporated. 5 different Cardinals pitchers combined to allow 11 runs. The bats, once dangerous, managed just 5 hits. Star pitcher Joaquin Onier lost control literally and emotionally and was ejected for arguing balls and strikes. The Cardinals batted just .185 for the entire series, and that one missed call, though not the only reason, became the symbol of their collapse. Yes, the call was egregious, but a championship team is supposed to regroup, respond, rally. The 1985 Cardinals couldn't. They fell apart, and for 2 decades, that Game 6 call was a wound that wouldn't close, used in highlight reels, argued in bars, replayed in nightmares. They wouldn't win another World Series until 2006, and by then, the sting of 1985 had already hardened into legend, because sometimes it only takes one moment to undo months of greatness, and sometimes you don't just lose the game, you lose your grip on destiny. 10. When 116 wins meant nothing, the 2001 Mariners and the myth of momentum. In the 2001 regular season, the Seattle Mariners were not just good, they were historic. They tied the all-time MLB record for wins in a single season with 116. They didn't just lead, they lapped the field. Ichiro Suzuki had arrived like a whisper and played like a typhoon, winning Rookie of the Year. An MVP in the same season, Brett Boone was crushing the ball. Freddie Garcia was dominating from the mound, and their bullpen was lights out. They had the best team era in the American League. They had a cohesive clubhouse, a swagger, a rhythm. So when the postseason began, it felt like a coronation. After dispatching the Cleveland Indians in a tight 5-game ALDS, Seattle was poised to finally punch its ticket to the Fall Classic. But then came the Yankees, a team still in its dynasty era, a team with rings, scars, and postseason scars that had turned into calluses. The Mariners looked flat. Their offensive machine sputtered badly. Ichiro, the man who lit up pitchers all year, hit just points into 2. Edgar Martinez, the veteran anchor, batted .150. As a team, they hit .211 in the ALCS. Meanwhile, the Yankees were hitting .264 and launching homers when it mattered. The Mariners had won 116 games, but suddenly couldn't hit. In Game 5 of the series, on the line they trailed 9-0 before they even blinked. The final score, 12-3, series lost for 2-1. Just like that, the team that had made winning look effortless was sent home, empty-handed, exposed. Seattle wouldn't return to the postseason for 21 years, and that 2001 roster, it became a cautionary tale. A team can dominate for 6 months and crumble in 6 days. They became the second team in MLB history to win 116 games and not win a title. Joining the 1906 Cubs, greatness, as it turns out, needs a closer, and in 2001, the Mariners didn't have one. Choking in baseball isn't just about one mistake or one inning. It's about the weight of expectations, the tremble in a glove, the silence in a stadium that expected to roar. It's what happens when greatness collides with pressure, and pressure wins. Across generations, these teams weren't just good, they were historic. 116 wins, 3-game leads, future Hall of Famers on the mound and at the plate. They had every metric, every headline, every fan belief on their side. But in baseball, belief isn't enough. Game 7 doesn't care how many wins you racked up. In June, a wild pitch doesn't ask how many Cy Youngs you've won. One ground ball, one swing, one rain delay, that's all it takes. The 2004 Yankees had the legacy. The 1986 Red Sox had destiny within reach. The 1969 Cubs had Chicago dreaming. The 2007 Mets had control for 5 months. The 2016 Indians had the perfect setup. The Astros had 2 of the greatest pitchers in the game. The Dodgers had 106 wins. The Cardinals were 3 outs away. The Mariners were practically a machine, and every single one of them choked. But this isn't a shame story. This is a human one, because choking, in the end, is just a byproduct of daring to reach too high. These teams flew close to the sun, and in doing so, they gave us drama, heartbreak, and history. And while none of them lifted the trophy, every one of them left a mark deeper than confetti ever could. They're not champions, but they are unforgettable. And in baseball, that's a legacy all its own.